Okay, great. All right, thank you. Finally, okay. So let me recap what I was talking about. I am working on arches, 140-pound cold pressed paper, and I have pre-stretched it. So I soaked the paper for about 3 minutes in room temperature water, and then I quickly stapled it down while it was nice and wet to a rigid board. And in the morning I have taped down the edges. My paints are mainly Da Vinci watercolor paints. I added, these are tube paints, but I added them to a travel palette here. And I've added some water to it to make sure that the paint becomes reconstituted and nice and creamy. So that will allow me to get the rich colors that I want without having to work at it. I will be using 2 types of brushes. These are squirrel hair brushes. These are a natural hair brush, and they'll hold a lot of paint or water. These are excellent for the early stages of your painting, so that you can get the paint really flowing, so that, you know, if you have a large area to work in, or if you're doing a wash or something like that, you can keep it going without it soaking straight into the paper and drying on you. So these are great for the early stages of your painting. Beside that, I'm going to be using some synthetic brushes. These will hold a moderate amount of water or paint. So these are great for areas that are smaller, or for working on detail, or, you know, where only a moderate amount of moisture in your brush is required. So all right, so let's get this show on the road here. Finally, sorry for that delay. I don't know. I'm going to get this figured out one day. You know, I can work on art and not have a problem, but man, oh man, the technology is a little above my pay grade. So here's my reference. It's not a great reference. It's a little on the dark side, which happens quite often when you're photographing white. Your camera thinks that you're looking at something that is a lot brighter than it actually is, and so it compensates for that. And then when you print it off, it becomes you know, the contrast gets a lot stronger. So that's one of the reasons why it's not always great to be working from reference photos as opposed to working from life. You see more of the real color in life. You see a lot more of the true value in life, better than you will printing out a photo. You can make adjustments in Photoshop and that sort of thing, but never quite the same. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up let's see, this is a 2 squirrel hair brush, and I am going to first deal with the neck. Now the neck has very small feathers that are you know, really too small to be perceived you know, at the distance that I'm viewing the bird. Like, you cannot see the individual feathers. When it comes to the wing feathers, however, they are much larger. Actually, it's not so much the individual feathers that you're seeing the groupings of feathers. So there are the flight feathers, and I don't know what they're all called, but I do know that there are the different sections of the feathers, and that's kind of what we're seeing. Sort of like, when you think of it, it's kind of like when you are painting a person's hair, for example. You don't paint every hair, you paint the groupings of hair. So that's what we're doing with the feather groupings as well. All right, so I'm going to come in. I can actually do the entire head. I'm just going to do this whole neck area. And I'm just using clean water here. And I want to wet this area so that when I put my paint on, it doesn't grab, so it doesn't have a crisp edge. So I'm coming in here. I'm staying within my lines, because if I paint outside my lines, of course, that's where the paint's going to follow. Okay, now let's think about colors here. I could mix up a gray and put that in, but if you look really closely, there's actually different colors within this these wings here. We've got I see a little bit of a sort of a cobalt blue in there. I see a little bit of kind of a purpley gray into this area. Even little bits of kind of a golden color in here. So there are subtle changes within the feathers. But so for the head, for this head and neck area, I want to make sure that I get some, first of all, value change, and I want to make sure that I have some interesting color in there as well. So I see kind of a little bit of a brownish color here on the back of the neck. So I'm using a little burnt sienna for this. Most of the other part of the head appears to be a little bit blue, so I'm going to use a little bit of, I'm going to use a little cobalt blue here, and it's going to seem very, very bright, but this is not going to be the final result. Now I have to make note of the light area along the front of the neck, so I won't paint this blue right up to that edge. And you'll notice when I come down to the burnt sienna and the two mix that they turn a little bit gray. But that's going to give me that lovely variation. There's, okay, I'll get some paper towel going here. I'm going to put a little bit of that burnt sienna on the head as well. Now, that's great as far as putting in the colors here, but I want to make sure that I'm also paying attention to the values. So I want to dull this down a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's Gray. Now I can bring in a little bit of Payne's Gray. So I'm going to come in and I might as well do this whole beak because the whole beak will be quite dark. My pose is slightly different than the photo. But the feather groupings and such are going to be the same. So I can start in with some little bit of Payne's Gray, and I want to start coming in and just touching in the darks. If my brush is really, really wet, this whole area will fill in. So I have to be careful how much of the paint is actually in the brush. Right, so it's going to get pretty dark. Get that little spot there. It's going to be pretty dark as it comes down to the wing feathers. Now, I am watching how wet my brush is because, as I said, if it's too wet, I won't be able to keep some of my light areas. So there's this nice warm versus cool going on here with the blue and the burnt sienna. Good morning. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Karen. Pam, so glad you could join me. Cheryl, Melody, EJ, Denise. Yes, thank you so much for joining. And for your patience with my tech issues here, and I haven't got the faintest idea why that did that, but I'm glad we're in business again. Okay, so I can use my brush to add color. I can use it to lift color. So if I want it a little lighter along the top of the head, I just rinse my brush and come along the top of the head here. Might even use my synthetic brush for this because my synthetic brush is a little bit stiffer. And so if I want to lift a little, I can pull off the color with a dampened brush, blot it. Okay, so I have the start of the head here, and now I want to start thinking about the groupings of feathers. If you think about the feathers, that they are not totally flat like a piece of paper. They are a little bit convex, like the back of a spoon. So each one is like a little scoop. So, you know, it's like a little dome kind of shape. So that means that it's, you know, if you were painting a sphere, for example, if you were painting a ball, you would have light hitting one place, you would have shadow hitting another place, and that way you're going to create the volumes, you're going to create the form. So at first I'm thinking about the basic form. If I do any individual feathers, that's going to be later, okay? That's when I'll come in and do the more subtle stuff. But for now, I want to look carefully at each form that I have to create and identify where the shadows are. They're not always going to be where you think. So it's very important to observe your subject closely to see where the shadows are falling. So I'm going to take this back section here and do this sort of big grouping right here. And I'm going to wet the area first. And the reason I want to wet everything before I actually paint it on here is because well, a swan has got very soft feathers, and if I don't want to have hard edges, I need to dampen the area first, so that when I put the color down, it sort of melts into the surroundings rather than just sinking straight into the paper. So I am putting down some water first before I put down my color now. So when I put my color in, I don't want to put too much in. So I'm going to go back to my cobalt blue here. And I'm looking closely at the form here. So now as it changes planes, you may change color temperature or value. So those are important things to look at. So I'm going to start bringing in maybe a little bit of permanent rose into this, and I'm just going to make this slightly more purple rather than having it just one blue. And so then I'm going to make a little bit of a transition here. Okay, so you see that I've actually created the form of that to make it look like the back of a spoon type of shape. But I didn't do it with just one color. It's very easy to look at a swan and say, oh, okay, well, what one color will I use for all of the shadows? And the correct answer is there isn't just one color. It's like when people ask me, what color do you use for skin tone? Lots of them, like all of them, kind of. So I use warms and I use cools, and I use varying shades. A lot depends on you know, the surroundings or how the light is hitting it and that sort of thing. So, okay, so everybody has joined me, but you haven't told me where you're from. Make sure that you mention where you're from there, and let me know if you've tried painting a swan or if you've painted white feathers in the past and had any issues with it. I'm going to bring a little bit of I'm going to bring a little raw sienna into this, really, really pale, just really, really thin down, just to create a little bit of warmth on this part of the feather there. Now I'm going to come back in with some of my blue, and you'll notice I'm changing things up as I go, that, you know, I'm not just painting my shadows with one color. It seems, and this isn't a formula, it's a guideline. It seems that as the feather starts coming into the light, it starts to get a little bit warmer. as it comes into the shadows, it gets a little bit cooler in this instance, okay? That's not a hard, fast rule by any means. Depending on the time of day and everything else, you will get different lighting conditions. Often yellows, for example. Like if this were a yellow bird, my shadows might be kind of an orangey gold. You know, they won't necessarily be cool. So a lot depends on your lighting conditions and the color, the main color of the thing that you are painting. Right, so I'm going to come in with that. I'm going to switch up my color to make it a little bit more purple here. And I see that I'm beginning to get a little bit of a hard edge. Let me zoom in on just the area that I'm working on. I've got some tape here that's preventing me from sliding this around. It keeps sticking. All right, so I've got a little bit of a hard edge here, so I'm going to take my synthetic brush and blot it real well, and I'm just going to soften that edge. So, but here's the key. You want to make sure that this brush is drier than that bit of paint, because if you come in with a wet brush, all you're going to do is create a blossom. So very important rule with softening edges is to blot your brush well to make sure that it's drier than your surface. Okay. All right, I'm going to come in with, where did I put my brush? Here it is. I'm going to use a smaller brush here. My synthetic brush. I'm going to go a little bit smaller because these feathers are a little bit smaller. So I'm going to do the next grouping. My paper I can feel is starting to get a little bit dry, so I may have to soften edges as I go now. Did the big form on a wet surface, but now that it's beginning to dry, I'm going to have to soften edges because it's beginning to, when I put a line down, it starts to grab. So then I have to manually soften it with my dampened brush, blotted brush. Okay, so next large grouping is this one down here. Large grouping means I'm going to wet it first. And I always find it very surprising sometimes. Always, sometimes. No, that doesn't make sense. I often will find it a surprise that if I'm painting something and I think that the shadow should go one place and I look and it doesn't. It gives me a surprise because sometimes you get reflected light. And I am seeing that on the end of this feather. You see there on the bottom part of the feather, there is light bouncing back up into those feathers. And so it's actually creating a light edge where I might expect a shadow to be, right? The sky is going to be the lightest part, so it's going to be the top of the feathers, right? Easy assumption, but look for this type of thing where you actually have bounced back light. So it's a little bit golden down there, so I'm going to put a little bit of raw sienna just to warm that up a bit. And then I'm coming back to my cobalt blue. Let me put this right here so you can see what I'm working on. I see cobalt blue here, and I actually, you know what? I'd say that even cobalt or even cerulean blue could come into this. I'm going to use a little cerulean blue, and you can see I'm really using quite a rainbow of colors for this swan. However, it will be all these colors are very soft, so I'm putting them down. They're quite diluted. It will sort of tone down and blend together as I paint more, especially if I get into some of the details and get some more grays and things in there. But everything I'm putting down right now is pretty soft, pretty subtle. cobalt blue. Now this part down here starts to get a little bit darker as the scoop part comes into play. So, you know, you can almost visualize this as the back of a spoon, right? So I'm keeping some darker shades in here. Rinse and blot my brush and just come in, soften whatever I need to soften. I think it's pretty good the way it is. Okay, so individual feathers now. We've got some small ones down here. I'm going to come in again with my cobalt blue. Now because it's smaller, no, actually I'm going to do this grouping first. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my cobalt mixture here. I may have to zoom out a little bit just so you can see what I'm mixing up. It's important to see the paint and how much I'm loading into my brush as it is to see what gets painted on the paper. So I've got some pretty thin paint here. Going to come along this edge of this feather grouping. Rinse, blot, and soften this edge. Okay, so keep that in there. And I'm going to wet another large grouping right here on the back. And I see quite a bit of warm in here, and warm and cool. So a little bit of the purple, a little bit of the cerulean as I come in along the back here, because it starts to sort of, you know, sort of come in like, you know, the top of a heart sort of thing. And so it's going to get a little bit more cool in these shadows. In fact, I'm just going to wet this entire section, I think. Come in with some soft colors in here. A little bit more, this is permanent rose, cobalt blue. That's my combination there. Getting it a little bit on the gray side, or purple side, I should say. Little of the cerulean, and I'm getting lots of variations in here. Do keep in mind this is a different pose than this one. This morning when I was trying to gather my information, I could not find my original, but this one is close enough. We are very lucky here. I live kind of on the most westerly tip of Lake Ontario, and we have a lot of trumpeter swans. This is a trumpeter swan, by the way. It has a black beak as opposed to the mute swans, which you see are a little bit more common. The trumpeter swans have the black beak. They're a larger bird. They're definitely noisier. They honk a lot, hence the name. In this lower section, I'm going to bring in a little bit of Payne's Gray just to get it a little bit darker here. I want to get the value a little bit darker. this little bit of coming into some of the burnt sienna even. And you'll see, you know, there's quite a few colors I'm using for a white bird. I'm including a lot of different colors so that in the end my whites, my shadows won't be flat. They won't be lifeless. I want to inject some life into them. So and you can see I'm really not paying too much attention to individual feathers just now. I'm still thinking in terms of the big groupings. Rinse my brush and blot. Just because it's dark doesn't mean that it has to be gray. So something important to keep in mind. All right. I'm going to come into a little bit pinker down here at the bottom. Rinse, and I'm just going to be painting with some clean water here. Pull some of that color down. Keep things nice and light. All right. So this area under here, I'm going to make this quite a bit darker. I can come in with a little Payne's gray. It's actually got a little underpainting with the other colors. The leg. Now the leg I don't have to be too colorful here. Usually darks will reflect quite a bit of color as well, but not necessarily as much as the white. Of course, the lighting conditions will make a big difference. Let's get a little more Payne's gray here, a little darker, and just get these feet in here. And this is like a mid-value gray, or even a fairly light. For Payne's gray, this is a fairly light application of color. So let me just see if I can zoom out a little bit more. So you can start to see, when I zoom out and you see the distance, you could sort of see, okay, this one's rounded and this one's rounded. That type of thing is going on here. All right, so I need to come down. You may notice in this reference picture that there's a big yellow tag on this bird. There's a group that actually protect the swans, the Trumpeter Swans here, Lake Ontario, because in the wintertime they fly south and they will fly to the US. And the trouble is that they have these wonderful white feathers, and they are used for things like pillows, throws, things like that, duvets, and so they are hunted for their feathers. And so there's a group that feeds them. So we have pretty much open water in Ontario, and so if they are fed and they have open water, they will stay. So They have been feeding them for several years now to save the trumpeter swans, whose numbers were dwindling. So, so there is a group that does that. All right, so I have added in this Payne's Gray on the feet, which just definitely gives you some contrast here. It's not as dark as they will end up getting, but some. I'm going to come in with a little more color in a few places now. I'm going to start working on dry because I want to create the separation between feathers, which you can't do when an area is completely wet. You know, you can only control one side if you're working on dry. And again, I can add in different colors as I go. It really isn't even that important what color I'm using, as long as I'm using a correct value, if I'm using the correct type of edge. Yeah, like so if it's a soft edge or hard edge, those are important factors, and whether or not I'm getting the right value. So now I'm going to start coming in and building up some of these values, separating some of the feathers. Working on dry. I will be careful not to, like that color I just put down, it's a little bit too blue. So here's where I'm going to actually sort of mix in some of my other colors just to dull down the color a little bit. I want color, I just don't want Technicolor. Okay, blot that a bit. Okay, this is where that tag is, which I'm editing out. So I'm doing my best to just sort of work around it. I will soften an edge. So blot my brush and just soften one edge. When you're softening an edge, by the way, I would suggest that you put down the color. So let me just give an example here. That's my phone. I can't zoom with my phone. Okay. So for an edge, okay, so I'm going to use a bit of this cobalt blue. The paint that I put down will be slightly, well, fairly fluid. You can see that my puddle is pretty, like I could drip it off my brush if I needed to. So I'm going to take this grouping of feathers, for example, and so I've got that in there. I'm rinsing my brush, blotting, and I'm just coming along from the outside edge and tickling the edge, outside edge, the edge I want soft, and I'm laying my brush down so that, you know, I'm not holding it up top like this, holding it straight up and down. I'm not pulling the color out. That's intuitive, right? You want to pull the color out. You want the color to kind of stretch out in that direction, so you want to pull the color out. No, you just, with watercolor, all you do is you dampen in front of it and it crawls out all by itself. So you just lay a damp brush in front of that color and that will get the color moving. So do another one, rinse, blot, and soften that edge. Let's say maybe starting to get a little cerulean up here, which is fine. I just need to make sure I keep the values in check. Just blend this a little bit more. Okay, and there are some real darks in here too, right under this feather. Let's get a little Payne's gray in here. For the real darks, I can definitely incorporate some of the Payne's gray. You will lose a little bit of that light and colorful areas in the shadows. You can still have color in shadows, but it will lose some of its color intensity. So it will become a little more gray. And to that end, I am using some Payne's gray. Now, some of the feathers have kind of a little bit of a ragged edge, you know, as the little, oh, there's a word for it and I don't remember what it is, but you know, as the feathers come to the end, they're not perfectly straight. They have little bit of texture along the edge there. One of you are going to know what that's called. That section of the feathers. That's why I don't play Trivial Pursuit. I'm not good at it. I can never think of the word of something. Yeah, you know, you can always tell the swans, Karen, by usually by how noisy they are. But the biggest telltale is the beak. It has an reddish orange beak, and sort of a black at the top. It's a mute swan, and they don't make any noise, hence the name. The trumpeters are aptly named because they are noisy. It's quite fascinating to go down to the well, here it's a marina where they get fed, and if you go at feeding time, oh my gosh, you're just absolutely surrounded by 1,000 swans. And they're pretty big, and they can be aggressive, but mostly they're just aggressive with each other because they want the food. They want it's mainly a corn that they get, but all right, so I'm just using different combinations of color. I'm not going to explain everyone because, well, that would just be a little bit too ridiculous, but coming in to separate these individual feathers here on the wing. And you might think that this shadow should go all the way around, but it actually doesn't. That one I went a little further than I wanted. Maybe I can lift some of that off. Just use a clean blotted brush and paper towel and pull that off, and I get my individual shadows for those feathers. All right, so now I am pretty much just using some colors to give a little more definition to some of these feathers. Some of these I'm actually looking into the feather and creating sort of the underside of the feather, and you do see a little light along the edge, but let me get some more color in here. I don't want this to be too, I don't want to suddenly switch to Payne's gray and have nothing but gray feathers. Won't fit together, right? So I want to inject a little bit of light and color into this. White will actually be quite reflective. It'll pick up a lot of colors from the surroundings. So now in some cases, because we're actually seeing sort of the underside of the feather, you're only going to see that light at the edge. And so in those cases, I'm not going to soften those edges, just in those instances where we're looking right directly into the feather. A little darker here. And I'm just going feather by feather, trying to sort out where these shadows go. It would have been a little easier if I had the exact same photo, but you know, I can get the general idea here. Okay, a little permanent rose. If some of them touch and sort of blend together, it's not a big deal, as long as the general, you know, the general shadow is there. All right, I'm going to come in and get a little bit more shadow down here on the leg. So I created the form, and now I'm defining the feathers. Each feather gets a little bit of a different highlight or shadow. And I'm working on dry because the areas are very small. Okay. Now here I'm going to soften an edge right there. And I see some just really subtle feathers coming down there, so I'm going to keep that paint really diluted. And then we have the individual feathers. And again, very diluted color, because one thing that'll kill this effect is to overdo it, like to put too much color into your brush. It has to be mostly water. But look at the beautiful colors in there, like just, you know, the way they work together and stuff. That can make your, like if I had done this with just gray, it would have been so lifeless. But yet, you know, injecting this color and variety in here is really bringing some life into this otherwise flat image. Okay, I'm going to rinse my brush. I will soften a couple of edges here. And I can take a lot of time to do this, or I could, you know, do it much quicker, because we are on a bit of a time frame here. Don't want to spend all day doing this, and nor do you want to sit in front of your computer on a day when the sun is shining. So I want to see if I can do this a little bit quicker, not fuss too much. A little bit more cerulean. There seems to be a little bit more cerulean up towards the top, which generally indicates that you're getting the sky, the effect of the sky hitting the feathers. And So okay, so every feather that I'm doing, I'm looking to see where the placement of that shadow is, because that is absolutely key to making it look like the feathers are shaped correctly, that you don't have a feather that looks like it's sort of suddenly sticking up because you put the shadow in the wrong place. Like this little unfinished feather here looks quite out of place. So we need to have some shadow put onto this. And you might think that, you know, every feather that tucks up under the next, the shadow would be on the top, right? Like that makes sense in our heads. But in reality, that's not the case. So when you paint, it's very important to keep in mind that your head can play tricks on you. What you think should be there, don't go on autopilot. Look at your reference. Learn what the shapes are, learn what's happening. Yeah, I mean, if you want to get analytical about it and try to think of, okay, well, this is there because of this or because of that, even better, because the more you paint, the more you'll have a better understanding of the lighting. Although sometimes it can be completely unpredictable. But for the most part, you know, I think having a good understanding of what happens with certain light and, you know, looking for the bouncing light and that sort of thing, I think is really good. So I'm coming in with a few more darks here. Soften some of these edges. Make sure I blot my brush when I'm softening edges. So glad you guys join me on Wednesdays and are tolerant through all my technical issues. I'm not sure I would have had the patience to hang around, but you guys are troopers. Thank you so much. There is another type of swan called a Tundra Swan that we get locally, and you can tell they have a little bit of yellow on their face as well, and so right in front of the eye there's some yellow, and that's the Tundra Swan. They're much smaller than the Trumpeter Swans. Okay, so I'm going to come in and get some more shadows, values built up, that sort of thing. So like coming under here, for example, really want to emphasize this this grouping of feather here, and so really want to get some strength going on here in my shadows. Rinsing my brush, softening edges. Don't want to wait too long to soften edges. The longer you wait, the less likelihood of getting a nice soft edge you will have. So what I love about this particular shadow is how it changes. It starts off real dark up in here, and then it starts to get a little bit lighter, warmer. So it starts getting into the reds and golds. Let's get a little gold in here. And so that my gold is my raw sienna is what I'm using. Quite diluted, but raw sienna is what I'm using. There we go. All right, so I'm going to come up here and get a little bit more shading on this as well. I like this raw sienna that's up, or cerulean that's up here, I should say. Rinse and soften. I think I actually need to make this a little darker, and that's pretty typical as you're painting away. You know, you think you've done something and then it dries and it's lighter. And as you add more of the values in, you realize that, you know, it really wasn't as dark as you thought it was when you first did it. Yeah, I'm trying to remember to post on my Facebook page that when I'm live, but an easier way would be to subscribe if you haven't. If you subscribe, it'd be easier, and then if I mess up posting on Facebook, you won't miss out. So just going to keep coming in and adding more and more values just to start to separate each of these individual feathers. And I may end up coming into some of this a few times before I'm actually feeling like I'm satisfied with the value, whether I've got it dark enough or light enough. And I will take the opportunity to sort of lean back and take in the whole picture. It's very, very easy to be working on your watercolors, and you know, you're working on this area and I can't get this area right. Well, often what happens is that you lean back and you go, oh, that's not the problem. It's the problem is the area above that or something else, right? So it's very important to step back, look at the whole painting as a whole painting, and you know, not obsess with one little, don't get into tunnel vision in one little area and get obsessed with it. So lean back, take a look, or step back. If you're standing, you can step back and take a look at things from a new perspective. Yeah, I actually really like these squirrel hair brushes. They hold a lot. They're very, very soft. In fact, you can see that I can sort of bend the bristles and they stay that way. Whereas if I take my synthetic bristle and bend it, it won't. It will spring back, right? It's quite springy, whereas this one isn't. Well, this one's a synthetic blend, actually. It does have a little bit in there to give it a little bit of spring, which is what I like about it, because it's really soft, holds a lot, but it does have a little bit of a blend in it, and that's just enough to give it a little bit of snap, not too much. So it gives me some pretty good control. I actually really like this brush. I'll put that in the description when this gets posted on my page. It is spelled D-A-I-N-A-Y-W. However you pronounce that. Good luck. D-A-I-N-A-Y-W. So there you go. All right, so I'm going to just continue on with a little bit more here, and then I'm going to put a face on our little, I shouldn't say little swan, he's a pretty big guy. Do I need to soften every edge? Nope. Very often there are going to be edges that will stay crisp. I think that's very important. there to define that, the edge of this feather. I need to make sure that that edge is a little bit crisp. Okay. I gotta say, with watercolor, you sure get a lot of mileage out of your paint. You know, you may pay a bit for your paint, but wow, you know, you can get a lot of miles out of it, especially painting soft and subtle like this. Okay, so I'm going to come into some of the extra darks. I'm going to start darkening them up. I also want to come down this leg and start painting the feet and stuff. So I was saying that they protect the swans, and that's why they have these tags. This one also has a band on its foot, which I'm editing out. All right, so I'm going to get a little darker here, a little darker on this one side. And there's a definite shape here to show that the foot is sort of on the sand. Right, so there's some little bit along there, and even though like they have the webbed feet, of course. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not even on the screen here. Even though they have webbed feet, they do have toes, and so this is, each one of these has a little bit of a shadow on it. So I'm going a little bit lighter and a little bit darker in some areas. So here, for example, I'm going to go a little bit, not as dark as what I did on the back of the foot, but there is a little bit of darkness there, and it separates the toes from the webbing. Okay. Back in with some of my darker color here. Payne's Gray is what I'm using. If you're just tuning in. All right, so I'm going to come along here and go. You might think that that would be a straight line, but it actually isn't. It's kind of a bumpy line. And again, we have the shadow from the middle toe. And then I'm going to dilute some of this and get in a little bit more of the shadows on the feet. But where the light is hitting the top of their feet, and their feet are kind of well, they're kind of like flippers, right? You know, which I guess are rubber, and they have that kind of rubbery look about them. So just gonna get a little bit more shadow in some of this, and that will give me the definition of those feet without getting too detailed. Gives me the idea of it. Come down just one more dark, so getting my paint a little bit more buttery, little less diluted. There we go. So we've got some really good strong definition on the feet now. One thing that you'll have to keep in mind is that in order to create volume, you always need three values. You need a light, a medium, and a dark. Now, that doesn't mean that the darkest thing is as dark as what I just put on that foot. So each of these feathers, for example, has a shape and a form because they have a light, medium, and dark. So just basically three values. I shouldn't say light, medium, dark. I just mean light, darker, darker, right? So that's what you're going to need. Sometimes it's dark, darker, and darkest. Basically just three different values in order to describe a form. Okay, so a little bit more right under this feather there. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And I'm going to put a face on our little guy. And again, I'm going to use a lot of Payne's Gray here for this because Payne's Gray is one of those colors that's already really nice and dark. If you're just using primaries to create your darks, it's fine, but you just it sometimes makes it really difficult to get it that strong. So I like to use a Payne's Gray. It gives me a nice dark. But you'll notice that I often mix other colors into it to make it more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt blue along the top of the beak here where the light is hitting it. And I'm going to use Payne's Gray for the main part of the beak. Coming up to the eye. And I'm going to actually paint around the eye here for a second. I'm painting this Payne's Gray in before that blue dries so that I get a nice sort of soft blend there between the two. So I have a little bit of highlight on the top of the beak. All right, so you can see that, that little bit of blue gives a good highlight for the top of the beak there. Now I need to put the eye in, and in this picture I really don't see much definition at all, but from having observed the birds, I'm going to start with a little bit, I'm going to leave a little highlight in the eye. I'm going to start with cobalt blue Payne's Gray mixture, so I'm not going to make this just Payne's Gray. Okay, and you'll notice I left a little highlight here, even though it's not completely white. It isn't completely white anyway. But all right, so that looks like a big eye, but in a second I'm going to divide this up a little bit. I'll pull a little color off just to lighten it slightly. Okay, I'm going to zoom in just so you can see a little closer what I'm doing here. So you can see that that eye is, it's dark, but it's not the darkest yet. So I want to come in and add a little bit more Payne's Gray. Actually, I think I'm going to switch to my synthetic brush because it's kind of a small area. So I'm going to use a synthetic brush here, which will hold paint, but it won't be really soaking wet. And I'm going to create the eye within the within this space here. The eye, usually there's a little sort of rim around the eye of most birds. When you look at birds, you'll see that they actually have kind of an upper and lower eyelid, and it's often a little bit, just a little bit of sort of skin where there's no feathers, right? So just like our own upper and lower eyelids, only these guys don't have eyelashes. All right, so I can see there's, maybe a little bit more I can add into. I'll go back to my squirrel hair brush for a second. Because now that I've got the face on there, I can see, oh gosh, you know what? I can really bring in some more definition into some of this area here. So separate the head and the neck a little bit. They the cheek area separate from the neck. So I'm working on dry this time to keep those areas separate. Remember when I did it before, I had wet everything and I worked on wet, but now I'm working on dry so I can separate those sections. Also going to bring a little bit more sort of around the face here a little bit. Be a little more burnt sienna. They often have kind of this rusty color on their neck. I'm told, and I honestly don't know how much truth there is to it, but I'm told that this the rustiness of their feathers on their neck is partly due to whether or not it's a juvenile or an adult, and secondly, it has a lot to do with the minerals in the water. If you look at these birds in the water, their heads are underwater an awful lot of the time. Now, how much truth there is to that, I don't know, but that's what I'm told. All right. Now, one thing that makes this really challenging, if I were to leave this as is, and I actually don't mind it one bit. I have pencil lines where the outlines are. I could just erase those pencil lines and you would know exactly what this is, right? So if I zoom out this far, do you need those lines to know what this is? Absolutely not. If I were to put in a background in here, if I were to put this water in, for example, maybe leave that duck out, but if I were to put this water in, for example, then I would have my lighter edges. But to have the edges just disappear, perfectly fine. This is what they call a lost edge, right? So where it sort of just vanishes. I don't know if I can get them too much lighter, but I could actually sort of remove these lines and just leave that without any line at all. So when I'm drawing out for something like this, for example, what I will do is, if I know that the feathers are light the way that these ones are, I will do my lines very lightly in those sections. Then when I'll come down to the feet, I'll put my lines in quite heavy because I know that I'm going to put a mid-value wash on there. And if my lines are too light, I won't see any lines anymore. So I won't be able to decipher how to do it. So that's what I would do, is I would, if I know in my finished painting that my, this area is going to be white feathers, I would do them very lightly. In the feet, in the beak, I can do it dark as I want. I know that the darks will cover it up. Oh, that's so nice of you, Verna. Verna says, my favorite weekly event is the painting lesson with you. That's so nice. I make it look easy. Well, you know what? I have to tell you that it wasn't, watercolor didn't come easy to me. I wasn't sort of born with a watercolor brush in my hand kind of thing. In fact, it was terrible in college. I really sucked. And I stopped doing watercolor for about 8 years and decided that I loved how it looked. I just loved it. And so I just kind of got determined. One day I went to the library. I took out videos. I took out books. I joined groups. I took classes. I went online and watched videos. All kinds of, I did everything to learn. And just little one little hint or one little phrase that an instructor would say just did it for me. Or I would suddenly notice something that I had never noticed before. And every little bit that I did kind of spurred me on to try harder and try harder and try harder. And so when I have somebody who says to me that they tried watercolor once and it didn't work, it kind of makes me giggle, because like that's somebody who just wants instant gratification. You know, anything worthwhile is worth working for, and watercolor is challenging, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've stuck with it, is because I don't want to be defeated. I'm kind of stubborn that way. So anyway, so there's my swan. I could put in a whole background. I could do all of that. I kind of like this this vibe of just having it disappear, though. I think that's kind of pretty, and I might leave it this way, and I'll live with it a little bit. What I probably would do, though, is maybe put a little bit of indication of shadow on the ground, because right now it kind of looks like, even though his feet are postured like it's on a ground, it's kind of floating in air. So if I were to wet under the bird, for example, let's come under here, and put in a little bit of shadow, I probably can get a little bit better effect. Now I wet the area first to keep this shadow nice and soft. Okay, so that sort of grounds the bird. That's not much of a shadow. It's just enough that it doesn't look like it's floating in air anymore. So yeah, so if you have any questions, or actually I'll just come to the comments here and see. Oh, thank you, Nancy. Oh, great, Jan. If you are going to be painting this, one thing I will say is that watch for lighting conditions where you have, good strong light. If you have strong light, it's easier to create those forms because the shadows are so easy to see. It also creates a more dramatic painting in the end if your reference has more dramatic lighting. So one of my favorite times of day to go down and photograph the swans is either early morning or at night. Actually, morning, because I'm on the side of the lake that I'm on, morning is the best. So when it gets to be evening, the light's sort of behind me, so it's not quite as good. But from the shore where I am, and or the marina, it's best in the morning for me. And it's usually before anybody else is down there too, so that's always good. Yeah, go for it, Melody. Yeah, go ahead and paint another swan. It's the only way to get better, I swear. You know what? One of these days, and I've said this many times, and I just have misplaced my my early portfolio. I should post some of my early paintings. Oh my gosh, they're so embarrassing. But they're important to keep because that really shows you what sort of growth you've made in your watercolors. So yeah, so if you have some of your early watercolors, and I'm talking to you, Pam, because I know that you just told me you threw some things out. Hang on to some of those. And then as you continue and try again, you're going to see the progress that you made. You may not feel like you're making a lot of progress, but keep going. You just keep showing up and painting more and painting more and painting more. Try harder to look for color, look for value, all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so thank you so much for joining me. Don't know what I'm doing next week yet, but I will try and post it early this time. Just the week got away from me this weekend, and so it was kind of a bit of a last minute decision as to what I was going to paint, but I'll try and post it early so that you'll have a heads up on next week. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me and for your patience, and we shall see you next week, I guess. Okay, so thank you so much. Talk to you later. If I can find how to get out of here. Oh my gosh, where am I here? Okay, so I'm going to stick with you all day because I can't find I can't bring up the page that has the the end button here. Oh my gosh, where is it? Where is it? That's so funny. Okay. No, I'm still here. Oh, okay. I think I found it. End stream. Goodbye, everybody.